The reinforced glass of Observation Deck 7 trembled as Commander Sarah Chen watched the feeds from Camera Bay 12. 2 weeks had passed since Project Cerberus successfully captured what xenobiologist Dr. Marcus Reed insisted was humanity's evolutionary missing link. The creature, standing nearly 8 feet tall with elongated limbs and a primitive yet intelligent face, had defied every prediction their team made. "Still no aggression toward the subject?" Chen asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Dr. Reed adjusted his glasses, scrolling through behavioral analysis reports. "None whatsoever. In fact, Commander, the creature appears to be nurturing her." On the screens, the being they designated as Subject Alpha moved with surprising grace around. The unconscious form of Dr. Elena Vasquez. Elena had vanished during the capture operation 3 weeks ago in the Amazon basin. Security footage showed her being dragged into the creature's cave system, and everyone assumed the worst. Yet here she was, alive, with Alpha treating her wounds, using makeshift tools crafted from debris. Lieutenant Torres, monitoring vital signs, looked up from his console. "Dr. Vasquez's brain activity is increasing. She might be regaining consciousness soon." Alpha seemed to sense this too. The creature positioned itself between Elena and the facility's harsh fluorescent lights, creating a protective shadow. Its massive hands, capable of crushing steel according to their strength tests, moved with delicate precision as it adjusted the crude leaf bandages around Elena's injured arm. Chen had commanded 3 deep space research stations and thought she'd seen everything the universe could throw at humanity. But this defied logic. Every protocol suggested that capturing Alpha should have resulted in violent, territorial behavior. Instead, they were witnessing what appeared to be genuine care between species separated by millions of years of evolution. "Commander," Dr. Reed said quietly, "I'm beginning to think our initial classification was wrong. Alpha's tool usage, its emotional responses, the way it anticipates Elena's needs. This isn't primitive behavior. It's sophisticated, almost programmed." The creature's head turned slightly toward the cameras, and for a moment, Chen could have sworn it was looking directly at her. Alpha's eyes held an intelligence that seemed both ancient and impossibly advanced, as if it knew secrets about humanity that they themselves had forgotten. Elena stirred, her fingers twitching against the sterile floor of the containment cell. Alpha immediately moved closer, making soft, reassuring sounds that seemed more like a complex language than animal communication. Something was terribly wrong with everything they thought they knew about their prisoner. Elena's eyes opened to a ceiling of reinforced titanium and the gentle pressure of massive fingers against her forehead. The memories came flooding back. The expedition, the cave, the impossible discovery, and then Alpha. She turned her head slowly, meeting the creature's concerned gaze. "Hello, Guardian," she whispered, in a language that hadn't been spoken on Earth for centuries. Alpha's response was immediate and emotional, a complex series of vocalizations that the facility's translation software couldn't even begin to process. But Elena understood every word. "Ancestor Mother, you live. The timeline holds." Dr. Reed's voice crackled through the facility's intercom system. "Dr. Vasquez, can you hear us? We're going to extract you from the containment area." "No," Elena said firmly, sitting up with Alpha's careful assistance. "You don't understand what you've captured here. This isn't a primitive hominid, Marcus. This is Kale 9947, a temporal guardian from the year 23A7. The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Elena looked directly at the cameras she knew were monitoring them. "In his timeline, I'm known as the mother of the new genome. My research into genetic adaptation becomes the foundation for humanity's survival after the great collapse of 2156. Alpha, Kale, nodded, solemnly, his enhanced vocal cords producing sounds that Elena translated simultaneously. He says the temporal displacement was accidental. His people were trying to study the pre-collapse era when something went wrong with their chronofield generator. He's been trapped in our time for 3 months, searching for me. Commander Chen's voice came through the speakers, carefully controlled. Dr. Vasquez, we need medical verification that you're thinking clearly. What you're suggesting is impossible. Elena stood, Kale steadying her with one massive hand. The modifications you see in him, the enhanced strength, the enlarged cranium, the improved bone density, these are adaptations I will discover in 18 months during my research into survival genetics. But only if certain conditions are met. She approached the camera, her eyes blazing with urgency. Kale's people exist because of choices I haven't made yet. Every moment you keep him imprisoned here creates paradox stress on both timelines. His genetic code is literally unraveling because the future he comes from might cease to exist. Through the glass, Elena could see Dr. Reed frantically taking notes while Commander Chen paced behind him. Lieutenant Torres was running scans that would show the temporal radiation Elena knew was building around Kale's cellular structure. There's something else, Elena continued, her voice growing grave. The reason Kale was sent back wasn't just scientific curiosity. His timeline detected something, a threat to the foundational timeline that creates their world, something that's supposed to happen in our time but hasn't yet. Kale moved to stand beside her, his transformed human features showing an expression of deep concern as he spoke in his evolved language. Elena translated, "He says the convergence point is approaching. Whatever changed the original timeline, it's about to happen again." The emergency briefing room buzzed with tension as Elena faced the assembled team. Kale stood behind her, his imposing presence somehow both threatening and protective. Dr. Reed had spent the last 6 hours running temporal radiation scans that confirmed Elena's impossible story. The readings don't lie, Reed admitted, projecting holographic data streams. The quantum signatures around subject, around Kale, are consistent with chronofield displacement. And these genetic markers? He paused, shaking his head. They're human, but evolved beyond anything we thought possible. General Morrison, who had arrived from CENTCOM an hour ago, leaned forward. Dr. Vasquez, assuming this isn't an elaborate delusion brought on by trauma, what exactly are you proposing? Elena gestured to Kale, who activated a device that materialized from what appeared to be empty air, a piece of technology that made their most advanced computers look like stone tools. The device projected a 3-dimensional timeline showing the branching paths of human evolution. In the original timeline, Elena explained, my research into adaptive genetics begins next year after a breakthrough in understanding dormant DNA sequences. But something happens in our present that prevents that research from occurring. Kale's people exist because they found a way to complete the work themselves 3 centuries later. The projection shifted, showing a catastrophic event in 2156, environmental collapse, resource wars, and a human population reduced to less than 1 million survivors scattered across a barely habitable Earth. Lieutenant Torres, monitoring the facility's sensors, looked up with alarm. Commander, we're detecting massive temporal fluctuations. Whatever this device is showing us, it's affecting local space-time. Kale spoke, his words translated through Elena. He says the disruption is already beginning. The event that prevents my research, it's not something that will happen. It's something that's happening right now in this facility. Elena's face went pale as understanding dawned. The capture operation, Project Cerberus itself, the military, was never supposed to find Kale, and I was never supposed to be here during his temporal displacement. General Morrison stood abruptly. Are you suggesting that our own project is creating a paradox? Not creating, Elena corrected, watching as the timeline projection began showing increasing instability. We've been pulled into one. Someone or something altered events to ensure that Kale and I would be here, together, at exactly this moment. Dr. Reed's scanners began shrieking warnings. The temporal radiation around Kale was spiking to dangerous levels, and something else was happening. Energy readings throughout the facility were fluctuating in patterns that matched no known phenomenon. Kale suddenly straightened, his enhanced senses detecting something the humans couldn't perceive. He spoke rapidly to Elena, his voice carrying an urgency that needed no translation. Elena's eyes widened in terror. He says we're not alone in this timeline anymore. Something else came through with him, something that his people were running from. And it's been hiding in the facility, learning, waiting for the right moment to strike. The lights flickered, and through the reinforced walls came a sound that made everyone's blood freeze. Something that was neither human nor anything. From Kale's evolved timeline. Something hungry, intelligent, and very much aware that it had finally found what it was hunting. Emergency klaxons blared through facility Cerberus as something moved through the ventilation systems with impossible speed. Security feeds showed only shadows and the aftermath. Twisted metal, shattered electronics, and containment cells ripped open from the inside. Section 7 is completely dark, Lieutenant Torres reported, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. We've lost all contact with the research teams in that sector. Kale moved with fluid precision, his enhanced senses tracking the predator that had followed him through time. He communicated rapidly with Elena, who translated for the increasingly desperate command staff. He calls it a void stalker, Elena explained, helping Dr. Reed evacuate critical research data. In his timeline, these creatures were the reason humanity had to evolve. They're temporal parasites, beings that exist between moments, feeding on the life force of complex organisms. General Morrison barked orders into his comm unit. All personnel to secure positions. Full lockdown protocol. He turned to Elena. If this thing is from the future, why didn't your friend warn us? Kale responded before Elena could translate, his evolved vocal cords producing sounds that somehow conveyed meaning directly to their primitive human brains. It hid within my temporal wake. I did not know until now. The facility shuddered as something massive impacted the outer hull. The Void Stalker wasn't just hunting. It was learning the facility's layout, testing its defenses. Commander Chen studied the tactical displays. Our weapons are useless against something that exists partially outside normal spacetime. Recommendations? Elena and Kale exchanged looks, a moment of communication that transcended language. There's a way, Elena said slowly, but it requires completing the research that creates Kale's timeline. The genetic modifications that allow his people to survive. They also make them invisible to Void Stalkers. Dr. Reed looked up from his desperate data compilation. That's impossible. The research would take years, and we have maybe hours before that thing finds us. Kale moved to Elena's side, placing one massive hand on her shoulder. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of centuries. The research is already complete, Ancestor Mother. It lives within your genetic memory, waiting to be awakened. The temporal displacement, Elena realized. Being exposed to Kale's chronofield has activated dormant sequences in my DNA. I can feel it. Knowledge that isn't mine yet, but will be. The lights went out completely, plunging them into emergency illumination. In the red glow, shadows moved wrong, bending and stretching in ways that hurt to observe directly. The Void Stalker had found them. Kale positioned himself between the humans and the approaching darkness, his body beginning to change, muscles expanding, bones shifting, his human features becoming more pronounced rather than less. This was evolution in real time, adaptation under the pressure of absolute necessity. Elena felt the same changes beginning in herself, her cells responding to genetic memories of a future that might never exist. Everyone stay behind us, she commanded, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the others instinctively obey. The Void Stalker materialized from the shadows, a writhing mass of darkness and hunger, with eyes like dying stars and claws that seemed to cut through reality itself. It had found its prey, but what it faced was no longer the same species it had been hunting. Cale and Elena stood together, human and post-human, past and future, as the timeline bent around them. In the emergency lighting of the command center, Elena felt the weight of futures pressing against her consciousness. The genetic memories Cale's presence had awakened showed her glimpses of tomorrow, the research that would save humanity, the modifications that would allow survival, and the terrible price of evolution under pressure. The Void Stalker circled them, its form shifting between dimensions, testing the barriers that Cale and Elena's transforming genetics were creating. Where normal humans were vulnerable, their evolving physiology made them increasingly difficult for the creature to perceive as prey. "The paradox is stabilizing," Dr. Reed called out, his instruments showing the temporal fluctuations beginning to settle into new patterns. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." But Elena could see the cost. Cale's timeline was fracturing, his existence becoming more tenuous as their present-moment evolution changed the conditions that would create his future. He was saving them by erasing himself. "It is acceptable," Cale communicated, his massive frame beginning to shimmer with temporal instability. "The Guardian Protocol requires the protection of the foundational timeline above all else." "No," Elena said firmly, her transforming mind finding a solution that neither timeline had considered. "There's another way." She stepped forward, placing her hand on Cale's chest, where his heart beat with the rhythm of a species 3 centuries in the future. The contact created a cascade of temporal energy that the Void Stalker recoiled from, not in fear, but in confusion. "The creature isn't truly from your timeline," Elena realized, her enhanced perception allowing her to see through the Stalker's temporal camouflage. "It's from somewhere else entirely, using the chronofield disruption to anchor itself in reality." Elena turned to the assembled humans, her voice carrying authority that transcended rank or protocol. "Everyone join hands. Form a circle around us." General Morrison looked skeptical. "Dr. Vasquez, this isn't the time for—" "It's exactly the time," Elena interrupted. "Humans are naturally quantum entangled on a genetic level. Our shared evolutionary history creates connections that transcend time. If we can amplify that connection." Commander Chen was the first to understand. She grabbed Dr. Reed's hand, who reluctantly took Lieutenant Torres's. One by one, the survivors in the command center formed a human chain around Elena and Cale. The effect was immediate. The temporal energies that had been chaotic and destructive suddenly found harmony, creating a stable chronofield that existed in all timelines simultaneously. The Void Stalker, suddenly exposed without its dimensional camouflage, revealed its true nature, not a predator from the future, but a temporal parasite that fed on paradox itself. With the paradox resolved, the creature had nothing to sustain it. It began to dissolve, its form becoming less substantial with each passing moment. Cale's timeline stabilized, but something fundamental had changed. Instead of returning to his original future, he had become part of a new timeline, one where human evolution occurred through cooperation rather than catastrophe, where the genetic modifications Elena would develop were gifts freely shared rather than desperate adaptations. As the emergency passed and normal lighting returned to the facility, Elena looked around at the faces of her colleagues, human, beautifully, stubbornly human, but now carrying within their cells the potential for something greater. "The Guardian Protocol," she said, smiling at Cale, who was beginning to look more human and less post-human as the new timeline settled around them, "isn't about one person protecting another. It's about all of us choosing to protect the future together. The adventure was over, but the real journey, the careful, collaborative evolution of humanity into something worthy of the stars, was just beginning." End of story.